Where is a judgment actually passed? Which courts are there? Is there a possibility of appeal? And what is the difference between an appeal and a revision?
Welcome to YD. Why do Germans do things the way they do?
In last week's video about Schöffen, lay judges, we looked at the history of the courts from the Ting to the Amtsgericht, district court. And of course, there were different rules in the various kingdoms and principalities of the Holy Roman Empire and later the German Empire. Even today, there are one or two differences in the individual federal states. But the federal states have one thing in common: the so-called ordinary jurisdiction, ordentliche Gerichtsbarkeit, which applies to all citizens, begins with the Amtsgericht. The term Amt comes from Ämtern, which used to refer to administrative bodies. So every Amt, every administrative unit or district also had its own court. There are currently 637 district courts throughout Germany. The smallest district courts have only one judge, but usually a director and several judges. The largest district court is the Amtsgericht München, Munich District Court. They are responsible for civil matters such as rental matters or dunning procedures. It is responsible for amounts in dispute up to the value of 5,000 euro. The Grundbuch land register is also kept at the local court. In criminal cases, the judge can decide on criminal cases alone if a sentence of no more than 2 years is to be expected for an offense. Otherwise, in the Schöffengericht lay assessor court, for crimes with a sentence ranged from 2 to 4 years. Appeals against judgments by the district court can be lodged with the Landgericht, regional court. If the amount in dispute in civil cases or the penalty range in criminal cases exceeds the scope of the district court, the regional court has jurisdiction. There are 116 regional courts in Germany. The regional courts are responsible for districts in the federal states. There is at least one, usually several, district courts in each of these districts. The regional court of Munich I, for example, only has the local court of Munich. The public prosecutor's office are also located as the regional courts. The regional courts are headed by a president. The judges at the regional courts bear the official title Richter am Landgericht, judge at the regional court. The civil chamber of the regional court is made up of 3 judges. The criminal division is made up of 3 judges and 2 lay assessors. In appeal proceeding against judgment of the district court, there is often only 1 professional judge and 2 lay assessors. In addition to the civil chamber and the criminal chamber, there is also a chamber for commercial matters. Here too, in addition to the professional judge, there are honorary judges who are called commercial judges and must have additional qualifications such as self-employment businessman or authorized signatory. There is also a Strafkammer, penal execution chamber, which decides on suspension of a life sentence or the suspension of placement in preventive detention or placement in a psychiatric facility. There is at least one Oberlandesgericht, higher regional court, in each federal states. Historically, these were the highest territorial courts in the individual territories. Historically, the higher regional court of Berlin is known as Kammergericht. There are 24 higher regional courts in Germany with over 1,900 judges. The largest higher regional court in Hamm alone has 174 judges. In addition to appeal proceedings, the higher regional court are the courts for the first instance for test cases involving investors, as well as for proceeding relations to state security, treason against the state, formation of a terrorist organization, or bribery of members of parliament. 5 professional judges are appointed to the higher regional court. If it is deemed that the additional judge are not necessary for proceeding, the proceeding can also be conducted with 3 judges. Honorary judges are no longer appointed here. The Generalstaatsanwaltschaften, General Public Prosecutors' Offices, are set up at the higher regional courts. There are also Rechtsanwaltskammern, lawyers' chambers, of which all lawyers based in the district must be member. A Bundesgericht, Federal Court, the Bundesgerichtshof, Federal Court of Justice, stands above these courts. The Federal Court of Justice is first and foremost a court of revision against decisions of the regional courts or higher regional courts. In contrast to an appeal, because the judgment is considered unjustified, usually the sentence is considered too low or too high, depending on the point of view, and therefore the case is dealt with again with an evaluation of evidence. The Court of Revision decides only legal errors that the courts have made in reaching a judgment. The Federal Court of Justice is responsible for both criminal and civil proceedings. Its headquarters is in Karlsruhe, and there's a branch office in Leipzig. The Federal Court of Justice is divided into senates, each with a chairman and 6 to 8 members. In addition to the presiding judge, 4 of the other judges come together for a trial. There are 6 criminal senates, which, in addition to being assigned to different regional courts, sometimes also deal with special areas of law, such as military criminal cases or traffic offenses. There are 13 civil senates, which deal with special areas of law without local allocation, for example, trademark, copyright and brokerage law, or company and association law. In addition, there are further senates for notary cases, lawyer cases, patent attorney cases, agriculture cases, auditor cases, tax consultant and tax agent cases, as well as antitrust senate and a Dienstgericht des Bundes, Federal Service Court, which is always involved in matters relating to judges, if, for example, the independence of judges has been compromised. Judges are independent in their jurisdiction and may only be guided by the law. The influence of a minister, a chairman, or president is prohibited. There is also the Großer Senat, Grand Senate, for example, one for criminal cases and one for civil cases. The background for this is that the law of judges applies in Germany. In principle, everything is regulated by law, but sometimes something is not clearly regulated. Judge-made law means that a judge then takes over this missing regulation within the framework of the law. This is in contrast to the Anglo-American case law. However, if a Senate of the Federal Court of Justice wants to make a different decision on a point than another Senate did on a corresponding case in the past, then the Grand Senate is called upon to decide. There is also a Gemeinsamer Senat, Joint Senate, of the Supreme Court, because we have a few other court strands. On the one hand, there is the labor jurisdiction, which goes back to the guild courts in the Middle Ages. The courts of first instance here are the Arbeitsgericht, labor courts, of which there are 109 in Germany. These are also presided over by a professional judge who is supported by 2 honorary judges. The honorary judges are nominated by trade unions and employers associations. A special feature of the labor courts is that there is no obligation to be represented by a lawyer. In the case of dismissal, complaints are often filed to determine whether the dismissal was lawful. Many of these ends in a settlement. At the beginning, there's always a Gütetermin, conciliation hearing, chaired by a professional judge. If this is unsuccessful, there's a hearing with honorable judges. Labor courts are responsible for disputes between employees and employers and between parties to a collective agreement. Sometimes they also adjudicate in disputes between employee-like persons and their clients, which sometimes overlaps with the civil cases of the district courts. The Landesarbeitsgericht, Regional Labor Court, is only a court of appeal. There are 18 regional labor courts in Germany. The proceedings here are also heard by 1 professional judge and 2 honorary judges. The Bundesarbeitsgericht, Federal Labor Court, is based in Erfurt. This is also a court of revision, which reviews judgment for legal errors. As already mentioned, here the court, which was still based in Kassel at the time had a particular influence on labor law and its interpretation. The court has 10 senates and a total of 39 professional judges. The senates here are also divided into specialist areas such as works constitution law, collective bargaining law, dismissal law, company pension scheme, and others. There is also a Grand Senate here, which has the same mediation or deciding role as at the Federal Court of Justice. If you have trouble with the administration, you go to the Verwaltungsgericht, administrative court, of which there are 51 in Germany. If the processing of a building application takes too long, or if someone builds contrary to the urban land use planning, this is usually decided before the administrative courts. So it is always about cases against a specific administrative act. There are two exceptions to this, which we will come to in a moment. The administrative courts are made up of 3 full-time judges and 2 honorary judges. The Courts of Appeal, or sometimes the first instance, is the Oberverwaltungsgericht, higher administrative court, also known as Verwaltungsgerichtshof, Administrative Court of Justice in some federal states. There is one of these in every federal state. Depending on the federal state, the adjunction chambers are made up of 3 to 5 professional judges and sometimes also 2 honorary judges. A special court here would be the Truppendienstgericht, Military Service Court, which deals with the military criminal law of the Bundeswehr and is also subordinate to the Bundesverwaltungsgericht, Federal Administrative Court. Accordingly, the Federal Administrative Court has also 2 military service senates, 11 appeal senates, and 1 specialized senate. The military service senates deal with the military complaints regulation. This is appeals by soldiers, and the other deals with the military disciplinary regulations, what is proceeding against soldiers. The 11 appeal panels are also divided into specialist areas like citizenship, aliens and asylum law, public service law, in building law, or road and highway law. Here too, there is a Grand Senate. When it comes to disputes with the labor office, pension insurance, or other social insurances, such cases are heard by the Sozialgerichten, social courts, of which there are 68 in Germany. Here too, the panels are made up of 1 full-time and 2 honorary judges. The honorary judges are also nominated by trade unions and employers associations who have a certain level of specialized expertise. For example, they can be representatives of the severely disabled or a medical professional. The court appeal is then a Landessozialgericht, state social court, of which there are 14. Berlin and Brandenburg, as well as Bremen and Lower Saxony, each have a joint state social court. The panels here are made up of the presiding judge, 2 other full-time judges, and 2 honorary judges. The Bundessozialgericht, Federal Social Court in Kassel, is then the court of revisions. A special feature of the Federal Social Court is that its panels are made up of 3 professional judges and 2 honorary judges. The 12 senates are also divided into specialist areas, for example, contract doctors, unemployment insurance, statutory health insurance, statutory accident insurance, etc. And here too, there's a Grand Senate. Finally, we still have 18 Finanzgerichte, tax courts, 3 in North Rhine-Westphalia alone, but Berlin and Brandenburg have joined forces again. Everything concerning taxes and custom duties is heard here. Tax evasion, on the other hand, is a criminal offense and is heard by the district or regional court. At the tax court, the panels are made up of 3 full-time judges and, in the case of oral hearings, 2 honorary judges elected from a list of professional organizations such as Chamber of Crafts, Farm Association, trade unions, and the like. As the tax office is at state level, there is no second court of appeal, only the court of revision at the Bundesfinanzhof, Federal Fiscal Court in Munich. The senates of the Federal Fiscal Court are made up of 5 full-time judges, 3 of whom reach a decision outside of an oral hearing. For a while, only decisions with general validity were published and not those relating to a specific individual case. Since 2008, the BFH has been publishing all decisions because some have accused it of practicing secret justice. There are also 11 specialized senates, for example, for corporation tax and double taxation, inheritance tax and real estate transfer tax, wage tax and extraordinary burdens, customs, and excessive duties, and so on. The Grand Senate then consists of one representative from each Senate. If a decision has to be voted on by all of these federal courts, there is a Gemeinsamer Senat, Joint Senate, which was set up on 1st of January 1969 to ensure the uniformity of jurisdiction in Germany. This is a non-permanent constitutional body. The Joint Senate is composed of the President of the Federal Courts of Justice, the Federal Labor Court, the Federal Administrative Court, the Federal Social Court, and the Federal Fiscal Court, as well as the chairman and participating judges of the respective senates. The oldest president of the non-participating federal courts presides. A decision by the Joint Senate is then binding for the courts involved. The last decision was in 2012, which defined that German regulations on selling prices for prescription drugs also applies to mail-order pharmacies from other EU member states. The Bundesverfassungsgericht Federal Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe is enthroned above them all. However, it is not to be understood as an appellate court or court of revision, but it's a permanent constitutional body, Verfassungsorgan, with equal rights to the Bundestag, the Bundesrat, the federal president, or the federal government. The Federal Constitutional Court has 16 judges and 2 senates. Historically, this type of court can look back to the Reichskammergericht Imperial Chamber Court from 1495. Also, its current position after the Second World War deserves special mention. The court generally deals with constitutional complaints, for example, when a new law would restrict constitutional rights. For example, it was recently negotiated whether the Solidaritätszuschlag, solidarity surcharge, was still constitutional or whether the decision on debts could still be made by the old Bundestag after the election of the new Bundestag. Of course, it is possible that a realization that something is not constitutional may influence the ruling of other courts and require them to renegotiate. The Federal Constitutional Court is also authorized to overturn the rulings of other courts if they violate the Constitution. The judges here are elected for 12 years and have an age limit of 68 years for their retirement. Re-election is not possible. In December last year, the binding effect of the decisions and the election procedure were enshrined in the Basic Law. Half of the judges are elected by the Bundestag, the other half by the Bundesrat, each with a two-thirds majority. The 2 senates are again divided into specialist areas. The first senate deals with a review of legal norms, and the second senate deals with the questions of jurisdiction between federal government and federal states. Well-known decisions have dealt with the fundamental rights of the person, of freedom of opinion, freedom of religion, abortion, or recently with the right to climate protection for future generations. However, those of you who have to go to court will probably know where to go because you will either be summoned or receive a letter from the court, and if you want to sue yourself, apart from the labor court, this will only be possible with a lawyer, and the lawyer will then know which court is the right one. As always, any remarks, additions, and comments should be posted in the comments. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.
Never really know what's going on. Look at me sometimes.